I'm Perry, artist, web developer, musician, and I guess I'm just going to focus on a project I built recently for a client. I currently work as a developer. I used to be a teacher, both in music and then into web development. Now I work as a developer, but this was a freelance project I did, somewhat between being an instructor and being a full-time developer. And it kind of goes into blurring the lines between creating for yourself and creating for somebody else and kind of making money doing that. So I'm going to focus on a project that I built for a client called Make a Mix, and kind of the process and then the actual product. And learning how to be creative as a career. So about me, musician, performer, former piano teacher. That is, I didn't hear what the. Can worlds collide? I guess a few months ago, I finished up working as an instructor, teaching web development, had some stuff online, stuff that I had done, and hopefully took a freelance job. So I had stuff like this. I had this online piano thing, kind of fun, kid-centric, and I did teach piano for years. So there's definitely I feel like a childlike aesthetic kind of there. And I built this online oscillator, which just creates kind of weird synth sounds. But somebody saw my portfolio and said, hey, you would be great to make this thing. It's a really weird project. And the communication was not great. But it was in the territory of music and web development. So I was I gotta take this one. So what they wanted me to do was to recreate this 90s CD-ROM type music game, and that they were using as part of a hip hop drug prevention program for kids. This is what so they were we have this CD-ROM of this thing called Make a Mix. And we have it on one computer that we use as part of this after school program. Apparently they're in a couple wards in DC, so they're somewhat legitimate. But I guess they just have an old CD and they've been using on one computer, and they're we want to just bring it online, bring it onto the web platform, give it, we have more than one computer, but we only have one CD. Can we put this online? And I was okay, I'll try to recreate the functionality. So they sent me some screenshots and some videos of a guy kind of recording his taking a camera to the computer. And I had to basically try to recreate this. And kind of, I don't know, put my own spin on it, make it, updated somewhat. Make it available online, try to kind of make it speed up, and kind of my own selfish goal, learn more about this library that I like a lot, that I've done with, that I've kind of messed with, Tone.js. So if you use JavaScript, you like music, you're a web developer, Tone.js is pretty awesome for getting sounds and kind of syncing them up. You can do a lot with it. You can kind of make a synthesizer, as I did. You can make a music player, and you can use it to kind of sync up tracks. And I also kind of, before I get into, okay, so being my own boss is kind of a process, I guess this project kind of taught me to actually let me start over on that. In doing this project, I was kind of confronted with a lot of things I was told to do and things that I normally do. So do I actually create a wireframe, or should I just dive right in like I normally do for my own projects? So I try to kind of do this as legitimate as I could, follow the correct steps. So things like planning and research, making sure I communicate well, actually documenting the process. So I kept a spreadsheet of how many hours I spent on this and what I did during that time. And kind of just communicate all that to the client about where I was. because they were paying me. I had to work out a deal with them and negotiate. You know, all this stuff was kind of thrown at me, and I never really, you know, you kind of have to negotiate. Like, I don't know, this much and maybe 3 payments, you know, like just kind of make it up and sound confident. And I guess that's how it goes. But I try to be as legitimate as possible. I sent them this mix, which is pretty much the same thing they gave me, just actually like laid out. And I used React, so it's all component based, so kind of separating this out, really kind of thinking about, okay, well, this will be one component here, this will be a component, and each individual track can be its own component, kind of scoping it in from big to small, and thinking about what the tough parts would be. Tools I used React, which is a front-end framework. This is all on the front end with just some audio files. Tone.js, use that for the music players. Mutability helpers are good for just changing large state objects. And Audacity, which I had to use, which is a free online audio kind of sound manipulator. The tracks they gave me, I'll talk about in a minute, but were all over the place in terms of the tempo. And so I had to edit the actual audio files, which wasn't a whole lot of fun. My planning was basically to spend like a week planning. I also gave them a time frame, which just kind of made sense to do. And then tackle the hard things. How do I actually sync up all the sounds together? How do I toggle it so, like, you know, you click one track and the other bass track that is playing stops, and, you know, kind of tackling the hard parts first. Some obstacles I encountered, getting the player working initially, getting some sort of sound that repeats on a loop. You can add tracks, you can delete tracks, that kind of thing. Getting the logic of changing tracks, having all the components synced up and communicating, and then syncing the actual tracks so they're all in beat and in the same key. Let me just go back to something like this, kind of and just not assume too much knowledge here. Basically, each one of these, actually, I'll go back to their drawings just so it's a little bit more. So the way this is really working is it's basically like a very simplified mixer for kids to mess with, like, and be like a, you know, kind of create their own beats. Here are all, like, I guess, beats, like drum beats. So maybe you want a hip hop beat, you click that, and the hip hop beat starts. When you click the reggae beat, after a second or two, it switches. So you can never have more than one of these firing at a time. But if you click bass and the beat is already playing, the bass will start, right? But you can only have one bass at a time, and so forth and so forth. These are just kind of auxiliary things. Like, once you get the song going, you can just kind of click some of these like sound effects. But basically, each one of these represents one instrument or one track. Only one of those can play at a time. There's an overall on and off switch and some volume sliders. So thinking about all that, and I'll say I greatly underestimated how much work that would be and how much logic would actually go into that. But yeah, so how does it all work? So Tone.js gives you something, and getting a little bit technical here, but I won't spend too long on this, gives you something called a transport. The transport is what's going to sync up all the tracks together. Transport's kind of like they describe it as a master time keeper. So allowing for application-wide synchronization. So I wouldn't have been able to do this most likely without this transport, or it would have been very difficult to do it without it. It supplies some sort of tempo or kind of speed for the tracks, and you can sync up the other tracks with it. The other part of this is each individual player. I had, I think 16 or so audio files. The sync function syncs them all up to the transport. It doesn't necessarily, sync up the tempo, but it does sync it up so that you can call certain events. So what you can do here, you give each player, each audio file this on listener. And here's basically how the overall, the kind of the main functionality works, is when you click on a track, this is how I did it, give that track a property of true, or playing equals true. And then every time the timekeeper, what is it called, transport loops, it looks at all the tracks. If that track has a playing property equal to true, it'll start that track. And I think it will make more sense to demo this in a second, but that's kind of how I was passing the playing function back and forth. Unfortunately, the tracks weren't in sync. So that meant it was synced up to the transport, but the tracks were in different tempos. They were in different keys. So it sounded like, I don't know, like listening to, the Rolling Stones and then listening to Daft Punk or something. It didn't make sense. It was clashing. It didn't sound good. So I assumed wrongly that they gave me all the tracks, the beat samples. They were not in the same key. They were not in the same tempo. So what I did is I pulled up this thing, which I hadn't used in years. There's not a beat finder in Audacity, which I thought there would be. Apparently that's harder to do than I thought. So I found an online thing. I listened to each track and I just tapped the space bar to the beat. There was a beat finder online. I wrote down the beat that it gave me. I kind of divided that with the transports beat, which I think I set to about 108, just kind of a moderate tempo. And then I used the change tempo feature on each track to basically divide it by the ratio, or multiply by the ratio. That was a pain. It wasn't as bad as I thought, though. It took a couple hours, probably a little bit more than that, but it wasn't as bad as I thought. I remember lamenting to James about, I didn't know how to do this. I was going to just tell him to send me new tracks, but it was part of the process. It's not something I thought of, but being a musician, I could figure out how to do this. Not too bad. And so here's the finished product. So this is just a picture of it. Let me actually click on the link. Actually, I'm running it locally, which should be more reliable. Get this kind of blown up a little bit. Proportions are off. The other thing they wanted, which wasn't in the original, which was this classic beats kind of thing. So what they wanted was the guy, I guess, was thinking some kids just don't get all this. So we need just some regular beats that they can just click. I'm still working a little bit on the sizing. It looks a little bit better than normally. This is kind of a little spread out for big screens, but basically this is kind of the final product, and I'll just kind of demonstrate it here. All right, so we click the rhythm drums, the transport starts immediately. If I click bass, there's a delay, and it waits until the whole thing is looping again. So I'll click this one pretty early on. It waits until it loops. It sees that was chosen, and it starts the hip hop. All the sliders work too. You can stop something, get this fresh piano going. All right, it is for kids. And that's basically it. The classic beats ended up being a lot tougher than I thought because basically they completely just cancel out everything. So I had to write a logic that stops the player, starts the transport player, kind of blur it out a little bit, and then when you click that, this stuff starts again. Okay, but basically, well, that's more or less the whole thing. One thing I didn't put is a master stop. All right, closing thoughts. Did I enjoy this project? Sort of. So I did. I liked it a lot more than what normal work pays me to do, but less than some of the projects that I did. Because I had to make, at the end of the day, all my decisions were filtered through, is this going to work for them? Is this going to be a good fit for them? Is it, it can't just be my own thing. Certain things took a lot longer. I might have given up on them. So it was enjoyable, and I did get to learn about the kind of player and transport functionality of Tone.js, which I hadn't really looked at before. Things, important things, planning, communicating, really important for this kind of stuff. Make the client feel like you're making steady progress. Let them know what's up. I did document the process, and it did take a lot of time, but based on what they paid me, it was still actually more than my regular hourly rate. So worth it, though it did, it took a lot of time. Any questions or thoughts on anything?
So does Tone.js play samples, or is it like synthesis?
You have to give it samples. I think it has some like synthesizer stuff in a way that it'll kind of layer a whole bunch of like sine waves and kind of make like a fake violin sound. But you have to feed it like samples for this. It doesn't have a library of beats or anything like that. But it can be good at syncing this up. Yeah.
Just asking for a friend. Where can I get access to make a mix?
I have it kind of sampled up. I'm probably going to take this down, but because it's like I'm basically just giving them this. But make a mix with the hyphens. .surge.sh. I don't know how this is going to work exactly, but I'm going to communicate with them and send them the files. It's pretty much done except for a little bit of sizing stuff. But yeah, make a mix. .surge.sh. I don't know if we can. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, question.
Was this your first project that you did like on a contract basis?
Yes. It is.
Can you tell us anything about like your process considering like legal and like invoicing and like anything like that?
Yeah, so they asked for an invoice basically. They asked about how payments, how do you want to do payments? They gave me a figure, I gave them back a figure, and they talked about how we want to divide it up. And we decided on 3 payments. So it was a pretty natural conversation about that. And then, then they just asked to send over an invoice, and I kind of had to look up how to do that. But there's like online invoice forms. Basically, they just need something, right? It's a very simple like first payment of this amount for this work. Yeah, good stuff to know for sure. Yeah. Any other questions? Or okay, let's